Thank you very much. It is an honor to be here talking at TED. I've been told that I have a face for radio, so it's a privilege for me to be here and to be seen physically. I'd like to share with you today some of my research that I've been doing on Cambodian orphans who are living in Phnom Penh, who have made an extraordinary transformation, who moved from a traumatic experience growing up in an orphanage and being transformed into scholars, attending university and graduating. I'd also like to talk a little bit about the lessons that I've learned from my interactions with them. And I'd like to begin with a story. This is a young man whom I will call Sokka, and his story is similar to many of the other stories that you'll hear, that I've heard over the years as I've been interviewing and working with Cambodian orphans. Sokka says this: I grew up in Kampot province, where my family were farmers. There were many times when we had difficulties finding food. I remember days when all we ate were pickled chili peppers. We also survived by eating snakes, crabs, frogs, grasshoppers, crickets, and anything else we could catch. Sokka goes on to say this: I grew up never knowing my father. When I was 5 years old, my mom decided that she should move to the capital city, Phnom Penh. She left me behind so she could find work to prepare a better future for our family. When I moved to the city, my life changed in many ways. I discovered that my mom had married again. My new father was abusive to me. He got drunk every day and would beat me. Now you should know that Sokka, soon after moving to the city, his mother passed away, and never knowing his biological father and his new father not wanting him, he was left to be on his own, living in the city, in the big city on the streets, vulnerable and alone, until a Christian mission organization found him and brought him home to this orphanage. Today, Sokka is about 19 years old. He's attending university in the United States with the hope to graduate and to return to Cambodia and to serve his country. Now, this is one story of many stories as I've been conducting research on Cambodia. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the recent history of Cambodia, you know that the Khmer Rouge in 1975 to 1979, under Pol Pot, was ruling the country. At that period in time, people left the cities, were forced into the provinces, into the countrysides. Over 2 million people, estimated 2 million people, lost their lives. And among them, professors, students, other intelligentsia. Now, as a faculty member who works in a university, it is inconceivable for me to imagine that friends, colleagues would lose their lives and my students would be summarily arrested and executed. I had heard that during those days, if you wore glasses, you were considered intellectual and you were arrested. The impact of what happened in the 70s, those critical years in the 70s, we still see its mark today. Low literacy rates continue to be a problem in Cambodia. Poverty, corruption at all levels of the system, as well as human trafficking, ongoing growth of orphans, and of course, for me, what's important, a broken education system. What happens when a university shuts down for several years and all the professors are gone? How do you restart an education system from scratch? Well, I'd like to say that we're moving from a shift. A shift is occurring in Cambodia. We're moving from a culture of conflict, this post-conflict, into a culture of peace. And the biggest benefit, the biggest impact that we have in terms of a culture of peace is education. Now, I'm an ethnographer, a qualitative researcher. Basically what that means is I learn and study cultures by listening to people's stories and observing their lives as they interact with one another. And then I get to help retell their stories and write about it. It's kind of a cool job, yeah? So I've been conducting this ethnographic study. I've been in Cambodia for about 2 years now. And a lot of my study involves extensive interviews with individuals, as well as participant observations. I will interview the students, of course, these orphans, along with brothers and sisters that they may have, teachers, administrators, people who run the orphanages. And I want to share some of the experiences that I've learned based on what they've shared with me. There is an orphanage that started, that brought Sokka in and a lot of his friends. An orphanage started, they had maybe 35 students in this orphanage. It was too hard, they tried to educate them. Not only did they bring them home, nurtured them, fed them, clothed them, but also they started to educate them. They started to teach them. They started a school. In fact, my 3 children attended the very school that they created for the orphans. They have house parents or guardians. But most importantly, they gave them dreams. They gave them the agency to dream of a life greater than simply staying off the streets. A life that's more than simply staying in an orphanage. More than simply graduating from high school. In fact, one of their dreams is that they would graduate from college and find gainful employment and serve their country. I'd love to talk to you more about the work that I'm doing. I've got a book that I'm working on right now. I'd love to talk to you more about their stories. And if you're interested, well, you could read the book. But I'd like to take time, the balance of my time now, to talk about things that I learned from my experiences with them. And I have about 5 things that I'd like to share with you. The first one, for educators, we need to redefine resilience. We cannot simply look at students and say there's one measuring tool, a score on a standardized test, or a GPA. Lives are complicated. These students' lives are complicated. It's not just one story. We can't simply assume orphans and think, well, maybe they're never destined for college, right? We cannot feel sorry for them before we've ever met them. Right? We need to take greater care when it comes to understanding their lives and how we can help adjust lives so that they could go on to college. So that's my first point. The second point, we have to set high standards. Now, as an educator, I've never met anyone who rises to low expectations. These students, in fact, were not satisfied simply with finishing school in high school. They had bigger dreams. They wanted to graduate from university, and they wanted to come back and work. The other point is access to universities should not simply be set aside for the few, for the elect. In fact, it should be open to everyone. And we should have expectations that anyone should have the opportunity to go to university. My third point, we have to learn to rely on others. These students did not do it on their own. In fact, there were many people who spoke into their lives. Educators, guardians, friends, mentors. It was an entire community effort that helped meet their needs, their physical, their emotional, their spiritual needs, as well as their academic needs. So another way of looking at their success is not an individual success, but indeed a group success, a community success. And so we shouldn't be afraid to rely on others to help us through on our path. My fourth point, fourth lesson, bloom where you are planted. These students did not look at their lives and wallow in self-pity. They did not look at their circumstances and say, well, I guess that's it. This is my life. The lesson I learned from this is don't wait for circumstances to change. Don't settle for excuses for things that don't work. We have to make the shift, as these students did, from merely thinking about surviving to thinking about thriving. And my final point is this. As it concerns these orphans and the lives that they've lived, no matter how difficult things may be, no matter what the world throws at you, no matter how tired you are, no matter how exhausted you are, never, ever give up. Thank you very much.